All right, hello to everybody that is not on the call from 4th Hour AP Gov. Looks like we're only missing 3 human beings right now, which is making this the most attended Zoom call in the history of remote learning for Mr. Book's classes. We have done our check-ins. We have done our announcement pieces. It's 12:24 p.m. on April the 15th, and we're ready to learn a little bit about the executive branch. Ladies and gentlemen, your screen should now be shared. Cool. Here we go. All right. Can you still see me in the upper right-hand corner of your screens even when I share the screen? Please nod yes if you can, or shake your head no. Is it just me that you can see, or can you see a couple colleagues also? Someone, Amna, I can see you. Can you just see me, or can you see a couple other people?
Just you.
Oh, that is exactly how I like it. All right, here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the presidency. We're going to talk about the executive branch. This is the next big chunk from Unit 2, which is the interactions between the 3 branches of our government. Hopefully, this is not the first taste of the executive branch that you've gotten from me since we started going remote. Hopefully, you've taken a look at some of the resources posted on the College Board. Because a lot of you are going to take a test here in a little bit, and the executive branch is very much covered on that test. So here's a great quote from Woodrow Wilson. It says, "The office of the president requires the constitution of an athlete, the patience of a mother, and the endurance of an early Christian." All right, this quote shows that this office of the presidency is multi-tiered. The president is expected to wear many hats. And there's a reason why I'm wearing a hat today. It's because I'm going to wear 7 different hats for you throughout the course of this lecture to describe to you the 7 different hats that the president of the United States is required to wear through formal and informal powers. Formal meaning they're written down powers that the president must have based on what the Constitution says, and informal powers meaning they're not written down, or at least they weren't written down in the original Constitution, but they're expected from the president or added to the president's slate based on how the role of the presidency has evolved. All right, let's start with this. The justifications for a single executive as set forth in one of your foundational documents known as Federalist Paper number 70. Ladies and gentlemen, you absolutely need to know Federalist Paper number 70 for the AP test coming up. Why? Because it's going to be referenced. You're going to be able to use it as evidence for the argumentative essay. That's question number 1 on the AP test on May 11th. All right? So for the argumentative essay, it's going to ask you to provide 1 piece of evidence based on 3 documents that the College Board gets to pick for you. So you pick 1 piece of evidence based on 3 documents the College Board will pick for you. Federalist Paper number 70 might be included in that. The second piece of evidence is going to ask you to cite a foundational document of your choice. It can be one of the ones provided, or it can be any of the foundational documents or Supreme Court cases that you feel comfortable with from all the way back in late August, early September, when you started on this crazy journey known as AP Government at Stony Creek High School. So let's get comfortable with Federalist Paper number 70, all right? It's really easy to understand. First of all, written by our main man, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton writes Federalist Paper number 70. He writes it in 1787, and the reason for him writing this is to explain that, according to Hamilton, 1 single ruler, 1 single person needs to occupy the position of the head of our executive branch. Some of the founding fathers, and I might even say the majority of the founding fathers early on during the Constitutional Convention, argued that we needed numerous people to occupy the head of the executive branch. Numerous people, not 1 person, an entire council of leaders. All right? Now, that's unlike anything you guys have ever seen before, anything you guys have ever heard of before. But the reason why there should be a council of leaders, according to the majority of the founding fathers during the early days of the Constitutional Convention, is so that we don't see what we saw happen in the United States from what we saw happening in Great Britain, with the monarchy having far too much power and seeing that magical term that you all know so well because you've heard me say it a million times, tyranny of the majority. They wanted to avoid tyranny of the majority. Well, Hamilton said, listen. We can still have one single strong ruler and avoid tyranny of the majority, and here's why. And he wrote about it in Federalist Paper number 70. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest parts of Federalist Paper number 70 that Alexander Hamilton wanted you to be aware of is that A. Ham said the president needed to have energy. They needed to be energetic. And he even included the ingredients to showing energy in the office of the presidency. One ingredient is to have unity, or to provide unity to the entire nation. To have duration, or have the expectation of, here's a person that's going to rule, here's a person that is going to occupy this seat as the head of the executive branch for as long as he and eventually she wants to. Remember, the 22nd Amendment wasn't passed until after FDR had been elected to 4 terms in office, meaning the fact that George Washington stepped away at the height of his power after only 2 terms, that wasn't constitutionally mandated. We hadn't seen that happen before. Somebody at the top of their power walk away from their seat of power. We hadn't seen that with dictators. We hadn't seen that with anybody that was an emperor. We hadn't seen that with kings. We hadn't seen that with prime ministers. And we certainly weren't expecting to see that in the office of the presidency. All right? So when I'm talking about duration here, that's what I mean. All right? A part of energy, one of the ingredients for energy is just competency. All right? So again, the first part of Federalist Paper number 70 is that Hamilton says that the office of the presidency, the head of the executive, should be occupied by one single person. That one single person needs to be energetic, needs to have energy, and there's some ingredients for that energy included in Federalist Paper number 70. Why? Why only have one person, according to Hamilton, especially since he knew of so many people's fears of tyranny of the majority? Well, one person is easily held accountable for their actions. You can impeach one person if they start flying off the rails, if they start doing things that are unconstitutional. You can impeach somebody. You can hold them accountable. Because remember, while the president holds a lot of power, they are still a servant to the people of the United States through the power of the ballot, through the power of elections, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So check out Federalist Paper number 70. If you click on any of the links from this PowerPoint, ladies and gentlemen, it'll lead you to further your understanding. There's videos to help guide you. Let's say this lecture is going in one ear and out the other because, well, you haven't had to listen to me for 4 weeks and you've really enjoyed that. And so now listening to me, all of a sudden, that's not something you want to do, then listen to somebody else. Click on these links and you can figure out what Federalist Paper number 70 is all about from somebody else's perspective, if that's what you want to do. Okay? Any questions? Unmute yourself or pop it over into the Zoom chat function about this foundational document known as Federalist Paper number 70. Hearing none, let's move forward. Presidential qualifications, the qualifications for the office of the presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously different from the other qualifications that you know about for being a part of the House of Representatives or being a part of the Senate. The president must be a natural-born citizen. What does that mean? Arnold Schwarzenegger cannot be president. That was a horrible Schwarzenegger impression. But he cannot be president because he was born in Austria. Even though he was governor of California and has served on a number of committees, he cannot be the president of the United States. Some of you got a chance to meet Madeleine Albright when she was at Oakland University in the weeks prior to leading up to the pandemic that is impacting each and every one of us. She was a sensational leader in this country for many years. She could never be president because she was born in what was then known as Czechoslovakia. So natural-born citizen means you need to be born within the confines of the United States of America or its territories. Ladies and gentlemen, the president needs to be at least 35 years old. The president need to have been a U.S. resident for at least 14 years before taking office. All right? So that means that they could have been born in the United States and then moved overseas. Maybe their parents had a job overseas, but prior to taking office, they needed to have lived here for 14 years with legal residency. All right? Hey, check out this, this slide right here. Check out your screens. It says duties of the president. chief executive and administrator, chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, chief legislator, party chief, chief citizen, chief of state. Since I made this, you guys, I've decided to do away with this screen, and I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective on this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for 1 second so you guys can see my face and only my face. And away we go. So instead of calling this whatever those slides called this, we're going to call this the hats of the president. And there's going to be 7 hats of the president that I want you to think about. All right? The 7 hats of the president. If you were looking to follow along in the AMSCO textbook, or you want to look back at the AMSCO textbook to reference it, this is page number 128 in the AMSCO book that references these hats of the president, or these roles of the president. When I say hats, I mean formal and informal powers, like I mentioned before. All right? So ignore my hat hair. I woke up, I taught a class, I did some stuff for AP Gov, and now I'm teaching you guys. I haven't showered yet today. I showered last night, though. All right? So here we go. Hat number 1 is chief legislator. All right, I got my construction hat on from Mr. Lafferty's son's Grayson's first birthday party that Breslin got to attend, or actually his second birthday. And as chief legislator, this hat means that the president is the national agenda setter. He sets the agenda for the nation. The president proposes bills for consideration in Congress through the hat of chief legislator. And I'll go back and re-say these all like I always do in class. And obviously the president's veto pen and the power of the veto pen falls underneath this chief legislator hat. All right? So I've got my construction hat on because this is constructing or creating legislation and policy through the office of the presidency. As chief legislator, the president is a national agenda setter. The president proposes bills for Congress to consider. And the one that you guys know so very well is that the president has the power of the veto pen, has veto power through the chief legislator hat. That's hat number 1 of the presidency. Any questions on that? Any repeats? Hat number 2 brings me to my military style marching band hat from my college days. Commander-in-chief power of the presidency. Hat number 2 is the commander-in-chief hat that the president of the United States has to wear. For being commander-in-chief, the president is a civilian commander of the U.S. Armed Forces, meaning they're not a general, they're not a field general, they're a civilian commander, a lot of times commanding remotely, making decisions remotely, and with checking in with the military hierarchy that exists underneath him, with him on top. Now remember, under commander-in-chief powers, the president does not have the power to formally declare war. That is something that only Congress can do. But through the evolution of the office of the presidency and the formal and informal powers of the presidency, we have seen legislation get created that adjusts, changes, and alters the commander-in-chief powers of the presidency. What's the most important piece of legislation that has altered the commander-in-chief powers? The War Powers Act. Remember learning about that back before the global pandemic impacted all of us? The War Powers Act. Take a look back at your notes from before we started remote learning to hear more about that. Ladies and gentlemen, this role of commander-in-chief has greatly evolved over the course of history, leading back to the Constitutional Convention. A lot of that has to do with the policy shifts. A lot of that has to do with the interpretation of the powers of the presidency, including the interpretation of what led to the War Powers Act getting created. So hat number 1, chief legislature, creating legislation, creating policy, setting an agenda. Hat number 2, commander-in-chief. Hat number 3 brings me to my Anna and Elsa crown, and that is the chief diplomat or head of state. Chief diplomat or head of state. Ladies and gentlemen, the president as chief diplomat is the symbol of the United States of America. When other countries look to who is our greatest asset and leader, they think of the President of the United States. When they identify one person as the face of the franchise, if you've ever heard that term before, the face of the nation, they think of the office of the presidency. In this role as chief diplomat or head of state, again, all this information can be found starting on page 128 and going all the way up to page 136 in your AMSCO books, and also can be found through different resources that I will be posting to you on Google Classroom later today and earlier today. The chief diplomat or head of state means that the president also can create EAs. E is in Edgar, A is in Allen. These are executive agreements, EAs or executive agreements between foreign head of state or foreign nations and the United States. My friends, only the Senate can ratify treaties, but the president can do executive agreements, which carry the weight of treaties, but the president can circumnavigate or not have to wait for the Senate to approve treaties. So it is agreements made between the president of the United States and other heads of states from other foreign nations that are like treaties, but they don't need Senate approval. That is the biggest role when the president's wearing this hat. That's the biggest role as the head of state or as the chief diplomat. All right? The president also needs to host heads of state to the White House, have formal dinners. In the age of a global pandemic, generally we see the presidents reach out to foreign nations and foreign leaders, see how they're handling things, and reach out for support. President Trump has done some of that over the course of this and trying to figure out how has China dealt with this? How has South Korea dealt with this? How have our allies in Great Britain dealt with this? And France and Spain dealt with this? And we have seen some of that go on with President Trump during the course of the current global crisis. All right? So again, we had hat number 1, chief legislator. We had hat number 2, commander-in-chief. And we had hat number 3, chief diplomat or head of state. Hat number 4 is the chief executive. And I've got my baby shark hat on here, you guys, for chief executive, because this is where the president needs to kind of show off his powers a little bit, almost like a shark would show off his powers in an ocean filled with smaller fish. Chief executive. This means that the president is the chief administrator of the federal government. The chief administrator of the federal government. All right? The president, the executive branch is all about enforcing laws. You guys know that. The legislative branch creates the laws or creates legislation. The executive branch enforces the laws. Okay? So under chief executive, this means that the president is trying to figure out how to implement or enforce laws that are created from Congress. Through this implementation, he and eventually she might try to figure out his and eventually her best take on the legislation that has been created by Congress, his approach to implementing the laws, the way in which he's going to shape policy, how he's going to promote or discourage legislation that's been created through judicial review, that has been created through Supreme Court decisions and other lower court decisions. You're going to see the president be critical of or supportive of bureaucratic decisions that are made, especially during times of crisis, like we've seen in the last couple of days, where President Trump has said, we are no longer going to fund the World Health Organization through the decisions that the World Health Organization has made over the course of the last couple of weeks. Him making that decision is President Trump as a chief executive. All right? Now, in terms of formal and informal powers, the number one thing you need to know for the AP test is that the president can create and make executive orders. EOs. E is in Edgar, O is in Oliver. Executive orders. Ladies and gentlemen, executive orders carry the weight of a law, but it allows the president to circumnavigate Congress and not wait for the slow and deliberate process of the bill-making process that Congress normally takes. Executive orders carry the weight of laws. Now, remember, I've told you this before, executive orders are going to be waved bye-bye to when a new president takes over, especially if that president is of a different political party. So when a new president puts on their shark hat, puts on the chief executive hat, they are going to, in their role as chief executive, outwit and outdo the executive orders from the previous president, especially if they are from a different party. Bless you, Reagan. So, ladies and gentlemen, check this out. President Trump has done his best over the course of the last 3.5 years to try to be a strong chief executive, to outdo the executive orders set forth by President Obama. President Obama tried to eliminate the executive orders set forth by George W. Bush. That's just the cycle of the executive order hat worn by the President of the United States. Here is a new term that you guys haven't seen from me, but maybe you've seen in some of your research prior to this. Another term that the AP Gov test is going to ask you about and that you guys need to know moving forward just to be outstanding citizens of this country outside of executive orders are called SS, or signing statements. Again, signing statements, like you're signing your signature. Signing statements. Signing statements. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, the president, when bills pop onto his desk and he signs bills from Congress into law, the president has the informal power of creating a signing statement, which means the president will make a statement in regards to his and eventually her thoughts on what this bill is all about and how he and eventually she has interpreted this bill. So a signing statement sets forth the office of the executive branch's opinion about this bill. So obviously it's going to be somewhat, he's going to agree with this bill somewhat because he's signing it into law. But he might not agree with every part of it. And therefore he's going to give his take, and eventually she's going to give her take on what the bill says. That's called a signing statement. And this only happens, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen as an informal power of the president. Signing statements can happen as a president signs a bill into law. All right? So once again, ladies and gentlemen, hat number 1, chief legislator. Hat number 2, commander-in-chief. Hat number 3, chief diplomat. Hat number 4, chief executive. Hat number 5, here's my party hat, the political party leader hat. This is the hat as the leader of his and eventually her political party. What does this mean? Well, this is nice and simple. I'm not going to spend much time on this. You guys know this. The President of the United States, as the leader of the executive branch, is the head of the political party that he and eventually she represents. So currently, President Trump is the head of the Republican Party. So when we have midterm elections or special elections during the course of the presidency, the president's job as the head of a political party is to assist in members of his and eventually her party to get elected into their lower positions, get elected to Congress, get elected to the House of Representatives and the Senate, get elected into state leadership positions and even local leadership positions within smaller communities, cities, townships, etc. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the political party leader hat that the president wears. And this is my party hat. All right. So once again, quick review. Chief legislator hat, hat number 1. Commander-in-chief hat, hat number 2. Hat number 3, ladies and gentlemen, is the chief diplomat or head of state. Hat number 4 was the chief executive. And the hat number 5 is the political party hat. Hat number 6, this hat might look pretty familiar to you guys because you're seeing it on a daily basis for the last 4 weeks. This is the hat as a crisis manager. The 6th hat of the president is the hat of a crisis manager. Crisis manager. This hat looks pretty familiar to you. Some of you have had to stop watching the news, and I totally get that. And some of you even messaged me and told me via Remind or via email that, you know, the news consumption just can't happen in your household anymore. That has led you down a dark spot that you can't be in. That's okay. There's no current events that are going to be required necessarily. That's going to require you to watch the news for AP Gov. And some of you guys continue to be totally tuned in via Twitter and social media, as well as, you know, whatever your news platform is that your families happen to watch in your household. But you've seen and heard of President Trump taking on this hat over the last 4 weeks, more so than we've ever seen any president in the history of the United States of America. And that is the crisis manager hat. The crisis manager hat says that the president is trying to lead the country through disaster, both natural and man-made disasters. Lead the country and its citizens through war. Lead the country and its citizens through economic crises. And lead the country the best way that he and eventually she can through illness, pandemic, viruses. Ladies and gentlemen, the hardest part of wearing this hat, and we're seeing this happen right now, is called the tug of war known as #federalism. That's the hardest part of wearing this hat, is dealing with the state leadership and the local leadership and all of the decisions that are being made at an instantaneous, every single minute, every single hour, every single day, every single week, every single month. There's decisions being made, handed down to the American citizens on an instantaneous basis. And there are so many people wearing this hat that the president struggles with how many people are wearing this hat and where the direction is coming from. And does this create conflict? Yes. Does this create divisiveness within political parties? Yes. Does this impact how people might view the president for a future election when the people go to the ballot box? Yes. But so does every other hat that the president has to wear. These hats are not supposed to be easy to put on. That's why there's only been 45 people that have ever worn these 7 hats. Again, hat number 6, you guys, is crisis manager. All right. And I'll go back and do my review after I finish hat number 7. Hat number 7, ladies and gentlemen, is moral persuader, or the hat of persuasion. The hat of persuasion. Persuasion. The hat of persuasion, you guys, takes us to a quote that you've all heard me say before from political scientist Richard Neustadt. Remember that name? Neustadt. Neustadt. In a non-global pandemic world, Richard Neustadt was the only political scientist that you needed to know for the AP Gov test. I can't imagine that the College Board works Richard Neustadt into the 2 total questions that you guys are going to be asked. But that doesn't mean you can't work him in to your responses and absolutely knock the socks off of the graders as they're grading your responses. You name drop Richard Neustadt and graders are going to be, holy mackerel, this kid's got it. Political scientist Richard Neustadt says that the #1 power of the president, the most important hat that he and eventually she wears, is the power of persuasion. The power to persuade is the greatest informal power that the president has, according to political scientist Richard Neustadt. Ladies and gentlemen, we refer to this as the White House's bully pulpit. Circle, underline, highlight, bully pulpit. You've heard this before. I know you have. I know that Kathleen's doggy is beautiful and distracting some of us in all the right ways. Kathleen, I absolutely encourage doggies and babies and little siblings to be in the picture, so you can absolutely hold your doggy, all right? But the power of persuasion, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Neustadt says it's the #1 power of the president. Teddy Roosevelt, back in 1917, no, I'm sorry, that's not the right year. I don't remember the year, but Teddy Roosevelt said that should be referred to as the president's ability to use his bully pulpit. Now, Teddy Roosevelt used the word bully to mean superior. He used it all the time. He would say, oh, bully. Oh, this is bully. Oh, bully. That means that this is superior. This is top. This is the top of the food chain. So the bully pulpit, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about it all year long. FDR's fireside chats was FDR's usage of the bully pulpit. Trump's bully pulpit is Twitter. And we've seen that and talked about that all year long. All right. So the power to persuade is the bully pulpit. And that is hat number 7, the moral persuader. To recap real quick, you guys, hat number 1 was chief legislator, national agenda setter, proposing bills for consideration in Congress, and the veto power of the president. Hat number 2 was the commander-in-chief power of the president. This role has evolved a lot over the course of the office of the presidency, and this means that the president is the civilian commander of the U.S. Armed Forces. It does not mean that the president can declare war. That is Congress's job. Hat number 3 is the chief diplomat, head of state, symbol of the United States, the ability here to make executive agreements to circumnavigate the treaties that need approval by the Senate, but still carry the weight of treaties like the Senate can create. Hat number 4 is the chief executive, the administrator of the federal government. This, ladies and gentlemen, is executive orders which carry the weight of law without going through the formal lawmaking process of Congress, as well as signing statements. Hat number 5 is the party hat, the leader of his respectable political party, the head of the party to assist in other people within the party to try to create more majorities for the president's party. Hat number 6 is the crisis manager hat, lead the country through disasters. Hat number 7 is the power of persuasion, the number 1 power according to political scientist Richard Neustadt, and that includes the bully pulpit. And back to the hat that I've basically worn almost every day during the course of this pandemic. Whew! All right. Any questions on the 7 hats the president wears? Pop them in the Zoom chat if you want to. All right. So this slide has to do with everything I just talked about in a slightly different way. The duties of the president also has to do with the 7 hats of the president. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, there has to be checks on this power. Otherwise, there would be tyranny of the majority. Again, there must be checks on this power. Otherwise, there would be tyranny of the majority. Some of the major checks that you guys know well, the Senate provides advise and consent power, ANC power over all the presidential appointees. All right, that is a major Senate check on the powers of the president. This is a formal power. Why? Because it's in the Constitution. All right. Another constitutional check on the powers of the presidency. The presidential salary cannot increase or decrease during the course of an elected term. The president cannot give himself or eventually herself raises. Now, as most of you know, President Trump does not actually take in his salary. He donates his salary. All right. That's not what this is saying. All right. This is saying that the president cannot give an increase or decrease to his salary. The president can absolutely donate his salary, but he cannot raise it or decrease it. Okay? One of the biggest constitutional checks on the presidency, you guys all know well, and that is the fact that the president is subject to impeachment. And last but not least, the judicial branch can review executive orders, and they can rule them to be constitutional or unconstitutional. And we've seen that happen with some pretty major Supreme Court cases. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've tuned me out, if you started to lose interest because you haven't had to go through class in the last 4 weeks, you've ignored some of the lessons from the first 3 weeks in your classes, which you were allowed to do, please tune in now. Eyes on my ever-expanding forehead or on my screen that is shared with you right now, because I'm about to take you through some unbelievably good examples that you can absolutely use on the AP test here in a couple of weeks. All right? First of all, we've studied impeachment. You lived through an impeachment in AP Gov. No class that I've ever taught, no class that Mr. Glazier's ever taught has ever done that before. So I'm not going to spend much time on it because we've lived it together in class. The Constitution says the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and in conviction of reason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. All right? The House impeaches or accuses with a simple majority. 51% of the 435 members of the House have to agree to impeach the president. We saw that happen with 3 presidents so far. Andrew Johnson, pictured on the left, Bill Clinton, pictured in the center, and President Trump, pictured on the right. The Senate then does the trial with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court sitting in on judge of this trial. All right? This requires 2/3 vote of the 100 senators, that's 67 senators, to vote to remove the president from office. They can convict or acquit. And ladies and gentlemen, President Trump was not convicted. All right? Therefore, that's why he is still in office. And even though he's considered to be one of the 3 presidents who has been impeached, he has been impeached in the House by name alone. He has not been removed from office after being impeached in the House of Representatives. You know this. We're moving on. As I said earlier, it wasn't in the Constitution that presidents can only serve 2 terms. That popped up after the 22nd Amendment was passed, after Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected to 4 terms. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, George Washington stepping away after 2 terms, that just became custom, not constitutional. That's an informal power of the president, was to walk away after 2 terms. It became formal when the 22nd Amendment was passed. Here's a great clip from the musical Hamilton, performed live by the original cast of Hamilton in the White House in front of then President Barack Obama, now Democratic candidate for presidency in 2020, then Vice President Joe Biden. Check that out in your own time. This is a song called One Last Time for the musical Hamilton, which takes us through Washington stepping away at the height of his power. Click through these slides and you can see some of the history of how the presidential powers have grown. Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people see Abraham Lincoln included on the greatest list of all time, the greatest presidents of all time. And, Lincoln was from the party of the GOP. He was a Republican, all right? A lot of the things he stood for are different than what the current GOP stands for and the party platform of the current Republican Party, but he still was a member of the Republican Party, all right? Ladies and gentlemen, President Lincoln expanded the office of the presidency through informal powers more than anyone had previously. He suspended habeas corpus. He seized property without Americans having any say in seizing that property. He suppressed newspapers and media. He did things that no president had done before because the office of the presidency grows in power during times of national crisis, and President Lincoln was the president during the Civil War and during the national crisis of how are we going to deal with this crisis known as countries seceding from the nation because of the issue of slavery. Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, they all saw the office of the presidency expand during their time, and you can read about that. FDR, obviously, you guys, because prior to what we're seeing right now, FDR had the biggest economic crisis and the biggest world war crisis. So you might say that President Trump is wearing the crisis president hat more so now than any president had previously. Well, FDR may beg to differ. All right. Now, check out the last note on your screens right now. It says, during World War II, Japanese internment camps were created. FDR passed an executive order in EO known as Executive Order 9066 during his office of presidency. This allowed the President of the United States to put Japanese Americans, so American citizens that had some Japanese descent within their bloodline, to put them into internment camps following the days, weeks, months, and years after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court looked at the constitutionality of this executive order and ruled that it was absolutely constitutional in the Supreme Court case known as, circle, underline, highlight, Korematsu v. United States. So on the AP test, you could absolutely cite Korematsu versus US in your first FRQ in question number 1. as a way in which the office of the presidency has not only, the power has not only grown, but that power has been checked and found to be constitutional by a different branch of our government. Korematsu versus US, the Supreme Court ruled that FDR's Executive Order 9066, interning Japanese Americans in internment camps all across the United States, but especially on the West Coast of the United States, and states like Oregon, Washington State, and absolutely in California, interning or prisoning Japanese Americans during a time of crisis and time of war. That's where I wanted to get through today, ladies and gentlemen, with you together. Stay tuned next week for more on the Office of the Executive Branch. If I went too fast for you, if I went too slow for you, whatever it might be, go at your own pace. Go forward if you want. All the slides are provided for you for the entire Office of the Presidency, for the entire Executive Branch unit. You've got everything you need to be able to learn everything you want about the Executive Branch. If you're taking the test on May 11th and you just want to get ahead and move on, great, get ahead and move on. In that Google slide presentation, I've got videos to go along with every single topic that I bring up. Because some of us are visual learners. Some of us learn great through podcasts and through YouTube videos, crash course videos, con videos, whatever it might be. Your only homework, because like I said, there's only 2 things you have to do every single week for AP Gov. You need to check in with me, hopefully via Zoom. But if you can't make a Zoom call at noon on Wednesdays, then check in with me via email or via remind message. That check-in needs to be, hey, Mr. Book, here's how I'm doing from a wellness standpoint, emotionally, physically, mentally. Here's how I interpreted our assignments for this week. Is this what I should be doing? If you can't make a Zoom call, that's how you check in so that you get the attendance portion. And here's what your homework is. I already blasted it out to each and every one of your emails. There are 6 Khan Academy videos that go along with the lecture I just gave you. You can skip through the videos if you're like, Mr. Book, this is exactly what you just covered. You can fast forward through some of the videos, but they're only, the longest one I think is 12 minutes long, you guys. Most of them are within the 6-7 minute mark. Take the time. You have 2 hours left in the scheduled AP Gov time, the scheduled 4th hour time. Take the time over the next 2 hours, grab some lunch, and watch the con videos for the next 2 hours. Get AP Gov done today. Answer the questions that go along with the last set of Khan Academy videos, and be done with AP Gov from a formal pass-fail standpoint. Be done with AP Gov so that the rest of the stuff you do for AP Gov between now and the next time I see you on Wednesday is just AP Gov test review. And don't do it alone. Ask me for help. Ask me questions. I'm here for you. Miss you guys. These calls are so incredibly important to filling your teachers' buckets. So if you hadn't been joining them in other classes and you're joining this one, know that your teachers really, it's really important for us to see you. If you have any questions, I'll stay on the call for a couple of minutes. Just let everybody else leave the call and ask me the questions more one-on-one. Reagan, I'm on the committee to make sure that seniors are loved and listened to. Officially, the committee has started. I know I told you about it earlier. So please, 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 I know you're through student council. I know you guys are being super creative. I've seen that like 16-page Google Doc that you guys are coming up with way outside the box, creative ideas to celebrate our student body. But reach out to me also if you want to have your voice heard, Reagan, or anybody, if you've got senior friends and you want to have your input on how to celebrate our seniors and how to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to teach you this week. Take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and be safe. Ask questions if you want to. Otherwise, this is Mr. Book signing off. Remote learning week number, whatever week it is. Take care. Love you. Miss you. Bye-bye.